Good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar, ADA Web Accessibility, a User's Experience by UsableNet, featuring our special presenter, Joe De Niro. We appreciate everyone taking the time to join us for this webinar today. A few housekeeping items before we begin. My name is Bethany Servin. I'm the Marketing Director here at UsableNet. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Jason Taylor, Chief Innovation Strategist and Advisor to the UsableNet CEO, and Joe De Niro, who is our featured presenter and is an Assistive Technology Specialist at Helen Keller Services for the Blind. Joe also applies his technical background in his work for UsableNet as a lead digital accessibility tester. So on today's webinar, we are recording the session and we are taking questions. So if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to send them in, and we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end, but we'll try to answer any questions that come in during the webinar as we can. We will also be sending out an email. In addition to having the recording, it will have a copy of the slides that are presented today. So with that, I will hand it off to Jason.
Thanks, Bethany. I'm going to quickly cover the agenda today. Hopefully, we're going to give you a sort of an overview of the experience and bring Joe's experience to the table in terms of talking about how he uses this technology. The agenda today, we're going to quickly cover like why are we here in terms of just an explanation of why screen readers and users of screen readers are becoming a very important community to support. We're going to do a quick introduction of the technology and devices that they use. Then we're going to go and have Joe give us some sort of hands-on discussion around how he approaches navigating the new website. He's going to show us some of the ways that he would go about experiencing a website. And then we're going to cover how you could potentially bring that same sort of screen reader experience into a more of a QA and dev environment. And we'll finish with a live Q&A feature presentation. I think I want to start quickly to give Joe a little bit of context of who's on the call with a polling question, just to understand what types of roles people are representing on the webinar today. So Bethany, if you can bring up that poll. A quick polling question to essentially determine sort of where we should make sure we focus our attention when Joe and I are talking about the screen reader, how it works and how he approaches the website. So we wanted to find out if people on this seminar were part of an in-house team that's working already today on testing and remediation, and whether you're an accessibility consultant. We probably have some external, internal legal counsel that are looking at how they are advising people and clients in the space of accessibility, and then also vendors of websites. So vendors who are building websites are becoming obviously more aware of accessibility as their clients add this as a procurement requirement. So just to share that poll, we've got a majority of people are actually part of a team that's actively working on accessibility. We've got a number of consultants and legal counsels, and we've obviously also got some of those vendors that I talked about in terms of that are understanding how they're delivering accessible sites to clients. So that's a good mix. It gives you an idea of the general interest in this topic area. I wanted to firstly quickly start with why are we here. So one of the biggest reasons why the interest has significantly broadened is around the fact that ADA lawsuits are more prevalent in the last couple of years. I wanted to make sure that people are aware that we deliver a free report on the sort of landscape of lawsuits. We just published a new mid-year 2019 where we gave the data where essentially lawsuits are now at a rate of 1 an hour, so basically 8 a day, 40 a week, and so on. I think there, in terms of from an interest perspective, 93% of cases from 2018 have already settled. That means that of the sort of 2,000 plus cases in 18, they've probably already created some type of settlement that requires them to do work on their website or their apps to make sure that they're adhering to accessibility. So there's definitely a growing need of activity and action based off of these settlements. The other thing that I think is always interesting is to understand that the cases are typically settling and settling quickly. That's typically a reflection of the fact that most websites probably have not given accessibility the priority it deserves. They have issues, and to reduce the actual cost of lawsuits is actually to reduce the amount of time that a lawyer can actually establish costs. So essentially, most companies are settling quickly. I think something like 80% of already in 2019 cases that were over 60 days old have already settled. And retailers are a very strong focus of these lawsuits, with 48% of the 500 internet retailers sued already. If we move to the next slide, Bethany. So why are screen reader users and people with visual disabilities so important as a connection to that? That's because most of these ADA lawsuits have 4 common characteristics. One is they're often brought by a plaintiff with visual disabilities. It is outlined that a screen reader is the primary assistive technology that is used by that user on the site. The plaintiff establishes that they can't use the website the same way as a sighted user, and they typically reference the W3C 2.0 AA standards and a violation of the ADA. So although there's many different types of disabilities, visual disabilities and screen reader users are becoming more of a focal and recognized group through these ADA lawsuits. So understanding how people with visual disabilities use their screen readers on your sites, understanding how you could potentially mitigate issues for them, I think is very important. And this is one of the reasons we want to do this session, so you can actually understand from Joe how he actually uses his technology. If we can move to the next slide, Bethany. So I just wanted to now talk about the technology they use. And I want to bring Joe in here to talk a little bit about his experience. This slide is actually based off of data that WebAIM do a survey every year. It's a really useful survey, and they're actually collecting the survey right now for 2018 data, which I think they plan to publish soon. What it does is it collects the typical user setup of someone who uses assistive technology and screen readers. The first thing that I want to emphasize here is that it shows you 2 things. One is it's important to understand that screen readers don't work alone. They work with a browser. And we'll get into it a little bit in terms of just sort of understanding the connection between the browser and the screen reader. But essentially, people with visual disabilities use a website exactly the same as everybody else. They use a browser first, and they use a screen reader to control that browser. So understanding the combination that screen reader users use, for example, the #1 used combination is JAWS with Internet Explorer in 2017, will get you to understand that it's not just about understanding how your website works with a screen reader. You need to make sure that you're testing with a browser and screen reader combination, which and we'll talk about with Joe. I wanted to get Joe's input here and get him to start talking about when you work, Joe, with students that are starting to use screen readers for the first time. What is the typical setup or the first sort of combination that they would typically be given in the sort of Helen Kelly environment?
We would typically use the #1 result there, which is JAWS and Internet Explorer. And the reasoning is with JAWS is is a paid. The difference between JAWS and NVDA is a free open source screen reader. JAWS is a screen reader that's paid for, but it's basically the standard that is used in the enterprise environment, and basically because we can, if there's challenges with any sort of proprietary software that a company might use, we can write scripts within JAWS so that our users can perform the test that they need to on a job. And then as far as the browser goes, Internet Explorer has been basically sort of the browser standard for the last 20 years or so. So that's the one that most companies originally were writing websites towards. So that's basically what we've been using for many, many, many years as the standard to train when we teach our students.
And one comment here for practical support, guys, and testing your site with screen readers. There's probably quite a few people on this call, considering they're working in a team, either in a vendor or locally. They probably see that first line, which is JAWS with Internet Explorer, and they might say, well, we don't test with Internet Explorer yet, so should we test with JAWS and Internet Explorer? My advice is you should start with a browser that you know works really well on the site and add a screen reader component for doing testing. The reason for that is that there's a few reasons, but the most practical reason is that you don't want to introduce additional issues which you don't know are being generated by the screen reader or communication with the screen reader. So we would typically, at a client, understand what is the most popular browser that's being used on a client site, what is the most popular browser that they use in testing. In the commercial world, that typically is Chrome today, and then add JAWS or NVDA or VoiceOver if they're using, if we're using Apple, as a component on top of that to do testing with screen readers. There's also another little note here, and Joe can talk to this. The other reason why JAWS and Internet Explorer is the most popular across all of screen reader users is because the vast majority of people who use screen readers are given those as part of their education or given them as part of their work. And again, to Joe's point, JAWS and Internet Explorer is more prevalent in education, in government. Internet Explorer is more prevalent in corporate, government, and education. So as a volume, the majority of users are using that technology of Internet Explorer, which actually will probably transition to Edge, correct, Joe?
Correct.
But in the same way that you would look at your typical users, one of the things you could start to do is to make sure that if you are communicating with your users who are screen reader users, start to collect data individually to your user group about what their top browser is and what top screen reader technology they use. Because if you go with the JAWS and IE, which is actually mostly used by people in education and government, those might not be your typical users on your site if, let's say, you're a retail site. So this sort of data from WebAIM is very useful, but also having your own data about the users that you've communicated with via your website is very useful to understand, so you can tailor your testing. And then just to sort of simplify what we talk about with regard to how a screen reader works, if you can go to the next slide, Bethany. Boil it down to very simple terms. There's three moving components. There's the web code on your web pages that provides the information to a web browser. Typically, people might talk about that being the accessibility tree. So the web code that's created to W3C standards does a great job of exposing information via accessibility tree to the web browser. The second component is you have a web browser that is used to navigate and use the website just like everybody else. And then there's a screen reader that is controlling that web browser and conveying information available to the web browser through audio or through braille. So it's important to understand that there's three moving parts, and when you do testing, you want to make sure that you've done you've tested the web code, you're using a browser that you're very comfortable, know that it works well with your website, and you use a screen reader. And that three combination is important to understand, that the screen readers aren't working differently than how everybody else works. The screen reader is controlling a web browser. The web browser is communicating to the website through the web code. Hope that explains the connection. So I now want to actually start talking to Joe about some of his experiences. So if you could just move to the next slide, and then we're going to start to have Joe take you guys through how he would approach a new site. But first, Joe, maybe you could give us a little bit of background on yourself, the work you do at the Helen Keller Institute, and also you can mention the work you do at Userborn, but I'm mostly interested in what you do at Helen Keller.
So I'm an assistive technology specialist with Helen Keller Services for the Blind, and basically my job is to provide instruction to individuals who have either been blind for the entirety of their lives or have lost their sight later in life, and to basically teach them how to use a computer to perform tasks in a work environment, so that they can get either back into the workforce if they've lost vision later in life and they had been working and just need to know how to use a computer in a different way, or if they've never been working before, if they're going to school. We deal with a lot of kids transitioning from high school to college, so we're teaching them how to be successful in the college environment to then be successful in the work environment. We do that by teaching them how to use the Microsoft Office products, how to browse the web, and all that sort of thing.
Joe, if you're comfortable, could you give us a sort of background of when and how you became blind, and what that progression was like in terms of using technology?
Okay. So I have an eye condition called retinitis pigmentosa. It's a degenerative retinal disease. I was diagnosed in 1994. At the time, I was working in the hotel industry, and initially it was of no real impact on me. I was losing my sight, but it really had no impact on me. In 2002, I began using a white cane. But again, on the technology side, it really didn't have an impact on me till about 2005, when I went back to school for computer science. And at that point, I was using Zoom text and was using magnification as my assistive technology. And probably approximately 9 years ago, I began to transition to JAWS. And I was using kind of both at the same time. And then probably 6 years ago, I fully started using JAWS all the time as my assistive technology. I still have a little bit of usable vision, but the smart thing for me to do at this point is to use JAWS rather than Zoom Text or Zoom Text Fusion.
And when you're working at Helen Keller with people who you're introducing to screen reader technology and how to use it for the first time, particularly on websites, what are the initial challenges that you find or they find with using their technology on websites for the first time?
So for the real challenge is to have a conversation about accessibility to begin with, because you're teaching people how to navigate a website, and initially, we're going to pick websites that don't have accessibility issues, so that we can teach them how to use arrow navigation and tab navigation and what's called quick key navigation, so that they can smoothly work through a website. But it's hard to talk about accessibility because there are so many different accessibility challenges, and you can't necessarily address all of those to a user. You try to explain some of them, some basic ones, but until you're sort of confronted with them, you don't know how to deal with them.
Thank you. So what I want to do now is we're going to have Joe, and I'm going to explain a little bit. We're going to bake this earlier. we're going to have Joe go to a new website that he's never gone to before, and take us through how he would approach sort of understanding that website, whether he has issues with that website. We actually have recorded this earlier. I'm going to start with my first rant, is because GoToWebinar is actually not fully accessible for Joe. So we needed to use GoToWebinar because actually so many people wanted to join this seminar, so we couldn't use our Zoom account, so we had to record on Zoom earlier, and now we're going to play that video for you. So it's actually a conversation between me and Joe, actually going through his first experiences on a website, and I'm going to play you that. So it's about 10 minutes long. It hopefully will sound exactly like me and Joe talking right now. And you'll get great feedback about how he approaches websites for the first time. So I'm going to play that video, and then at the end, we're going to come back and we're going to continue to talk to Joe. I apologize, I think I just need to reload. So now we're going to, Joe, maybe you could just tell us. Apologize, I need to start at the beginning.
So today I am.
Sorry guys, I'll start that again. Approach navigating a site that he's never been to before. So I'm going to give him a new site in a second. But first, Joe, maybe you could just tell us the type of browser that you're running on your computer, and the screen reader technology that you're using today.
Okay, so today I am using Internet Explorer 11, and I am using ZoomText Fusion 2019, which is actually a combination of screen reader and magnification.
So I'm going to give you a new website to go look at, and essentially sort of just want you to free flow sort of a conversation about how you'd approach that site using your combination of your browser and your screen reader, and sort of just take us through your first experiences and how you first approach understanding what that site has to offer and how you navigate. So the site I've chosen is actually a new site. It's actually called anewjfk.com. It's a website that's promoting the new JFK terminal. So the website again is anewjfk.com.
Okay, so let's go there.
Alt-D, address and search using Bing Edit. ANEWJFK. Control-Enter. A new JFK Port Authority. A new JFK
Okay, so I am at the website, and typically the first thing that I am going to do when I get to a new website is go and use heading navigation to get a feel for the different areas of information that's on the website, to get a feel for the website in general, what the content is that's on the website. So I'm going to start to do that now.
Transforming JFK into a modern 21st century airport, heading level 1. The new JFK heading level 3. JFK redevelopment program heading level 3. 9600 heading level 1.
So the first couple of headings were, had some, I had some sense of what they were, but this one here, the 9600, that doesn't really make any sense to me at all.
Joe, for the
heading level 1.
Scroll down a little bit on the browser.
Say that again?
Could you just scroll down a little bit in the browser window?
Blank. Total jobs. Blank. Blank. Heading level $1.13 bill. Blank.
Is this more like this?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Investment. With $1 billion in PA.
So the last three headings just had numbers, and they really didn't make any sense to me of what those numbers were about at all.
Yeah, and just a comment I can make for everybody watching. and it's reasonably obvious to someone looking at this visually, where those numbers are have been put visually very large on the page. So whoever coded the page probably isn't thinking necessarily about the meaningfulness of the headers. They're actually thinking about the visualization of the content on the page. So that visualization cue doesn't mean a lot to Joe and people who screen readers. So Joe is hearing headers which aren't necessarily helping him understand what this homepage is about and what the most important areas of the homepage are.
Yeah. So after I get a little bit of a sense with heading navigation, generally I'm going to probably circle back to the top of the page, because typically your main navigation menus are typically towards the top of the page, and one would assume that they're probably under the first couple of headings, and I'm going to go looking for that navigation to see what content is on the site that's a little bit more detailed. So I'm going to go back up to the top of the page.
A new JFK.
And I'm going to go to the first heading.
Transforming JFK into a modern 21st century.
And then I'm just going to arrow down and see if I can find any sort of menu to navigate.
Blank. John F. Kennedy International Airport, left paren JFK, right paren, is one of the busiest airports in the nation. Heading level 3, the new JFK. List of 7 items. Unified terminal layout. World-class amenities.
Right. This initially sounds like it's going to be a list that's links, but I'm not hearing anything that's indicating that any of these are a link.
Redesigned on airport traffic pattern. Centralized ground transportation options.
So none of these are links, so I'm going to go to the next heading.
JFK Redevelopment Program, heading level 3. Blank. Heading level 19600.
And I'm still not finding really any navigation links on the site. I don't know how far down I am visually on the site, but I've gone through 4 headers now, and there's still no menus to be found. So at this point, I would probably circle up and bring up a links list to see if I can find the links using JAWS to find navigation links, and then bring focus to those menu.
A new JFK Port Authority of New York. Home. 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 Numlock on. Numlock off. Version static. Link. Upload/Twitter. 3 of 17.
So I'm at the top of the links on the page.
Travelers. 4 of 17.
And I'm seeing travelers.
NY State Transforming JFK. 5 of 17.
New York State Transforming JFK.
JFK International Airport Redevelopment. JFK International Airport Redevelopment. 6 of 17.
So these sound like the links I want to be to as far as the navigation. So I'm going to bring myself up to the top link.
Number page. 1 of 17. Upload/.
And I'm going to bring focus to that link.
Alt-M. Blank.
And I'm going to start arrowing down through that and try to determine where I am on the page.
Escape. Pop-up file. Escape. New browser window. A new JFK. A new JFK dash. Same page, link number page.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Link graphic upload /pod home logo. Link Twitter. Link travelers.
All right, so we're at those links. Link Twitter, link travelers.
Link NY State Transforming JFK.
So now, and I can click on one of those navigation links, but I want to see where I am on that page. So I'm going to hit the heading again to kind of get a feel for where the next header is relative to this menu.
Transforming JFK into a modern 21st century airport, heading level 1.
And that's the first heading on the page. So all these navigation links are actually above the first heading. So for me, that's a challenge because initially I'm going past that and I have to circle back and kind of search around to find that navigation menu.
Yeah, Joe, I just wanted to make a comment for the guys watching this. So just to recap, Joe's original challenge is he's going to what are the big headers on the page, and then what are the navigation associated with those sections. And I think you may have realized that Joe had skipped past the main navigation and was into sort of sections of the page already. So because the main navigation that we can all visually see has not been indicated as a main navigation structure, it doesn't stand out for Joe. That's the first thing. So it's not easy for Joe to find those that we can visually see are the 5 main navigation. It's not easy for him to know that those are the 5 main navigational links. And then you also notice when you went back up to links, well, they're in that link structure, right? So they're in that link structure, but there's 3 links before those links. There's nothing indicating that those links are any different than the other links that are going to come along. So again, it's very hard for Joe to understand that these 5 links, terminal programs, work with us, media, public outreach, and contact, are the links that the website designer really wanted him to know that exist. Because they're not any different than any other links that are on the page. They're not inside the main headers. And it's very hard for Joe to know that those 5 links, which are we visually see in front of us, are the links that are the most important information.
Let's go back up to the top of the page.
A new JFK dashboard, same page link.
So now I know that all these links are at the top of the page.
Link graphic, link Twitter, link travelers, link NY state dash transforming, visited link graphic JFK International Airport, navigation region. List of 6 items, visited link terminal projects.
Okay.
Link work with us, link media.
So I can select any of these.
Visited link terminal.
Let's do terminal.
Enter. Terminal projects link. Terminal projects dash JFK International Airport redevelopment. RSS feeds.
So again, we go back to heading structure.
The new terminal 1, heading level 2. Heading level 2, the new terminal 1. Terminal 6, heading level 2.
And we're doing this the same thing, just using heading structure. In this instance, the headings sort of make sense relative to what the link is that I selected. I guess it's talking about the new terminals that they're building at JFK.
Terminal 6, heading level 2.
But
Terminal 6, heading level 2.
But what I am hearing is double headings, though.
Yes. I mean, they're a little annoying for you, but they're not necessarily, they're not necessarily stopping you to get to those, let's say, important information. And for the people watching, this page is super simple, and it has two basically headers and links on it, which essentially they're big titles for you to go through to the new Terminal 1 and new Terminal 6 information sites. And there's actually not a lot that someone could get wrong here, but they already made a mistake by basically having double headers. But the other thing to recognize is that if Joe's first experience with the homepage is quite confusing and he's not sure where to go, then every page he starts to doubt if it's not really well organized. So, getting the homepage really well structured and understanding how to declare main navigation over sub-navigation, how to make sure that headers are structured in the right way, and sort of making it easy for developers to connect with that. I think it's easy when people listen to Joe, listening to the site, how probably frustrating it can be when you first go to a site and it's not well structured, and it doesn't make sense in the systematic way that it's organized and coded. So, was there anything else? I know we don't want to spend all the time looking at how you go. Was there anything else that you wanted to quickly cover before we go off and look at how we can help developers maybe experience this for themselves without needing screen reader technology and being an expert with screen reading?
I think you covered most of it. I mean, good meaningful structure is on the homepage establishes for a screen reader user confidence that they're going to be able to do whatever it is that they're going to do, or whether it's an e-commerce site or just an informational site, etc. That's where it all begins, is on that beginning site. And you're right, when I encounter a site that's not accessible, very accessible from the get-go, it starts to make me doubt what my experience is going to be like as I proceed.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to stop the video there. That's the end of the video. Thank you, Joe, for making that video earlier. Probably for some of you, if this is the first time you've sort of sat and listened to someone using a screen reader, especially on a site for the first time, you might have a little bit of a headache. But just imagine what it's like for Joe every day. So the thing that I wanted to show now is that in the world of accessibility, this sort of ability to expose that experience, but in a more development and QA approach is starting to become addressed by a number of solutions out there. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples of how we try to deliver that ability to sort of explore the structure of a site, the important elements of the site, as if you are a screen reader user, but more in a QA and dev environment. So maybe it's a little bit quicker and easier for developers to connect with the challenges that they may have created for Joe. So, and a caveat, I'm going to talk about some features and functions within our technology, but I'll also reference that some of these features or functions also exist in other products out there. So this is more about what you should be looking to give your developers and QA teams in terms of functionality, so they can actually appreciate the end screen reader experience in a quicker way, so they're actually developing and designing with those components in mind. So I'm going to first sort of take you to, and actually this is a service that we provide for free off of our website, the ability to test any site using our Aqua tool. Comes with this basically two-part level, and you should probably be looking for this when you have tools that you use locally. One is a summary that sort of pinpoints the items that need to be or have been identified that need to be fixed, or identifies the elements that need to be manually reviewed and give you a sort of a snapshot of that in terms of volume. But the more important things I want to show you is in the actual in the actual QA environment, where I can reproduce what Joe was experiencing, but more in a QA and in dev environment. So we saw first Joe had a problem with this site in the header world. So if I click on the header world, one of the things that you might be looking for, and there's a number of solutions out there. One I think is JAWS Inspect, for example, right? Is the ability for inside of this environment to expose to your developers in QA for example, header structure. So what you saw Joe struggle with in terms of the headers not representing, let's say, good structure and actually being a little bit unmeaningful are exposed here. And if I just increase my browser size, just so you can see that essentially in the screen reader previews, we expose and show the order of the headers, the fact that the order is out of headers, and what those headers are actually defined as. Inside of our screen reader previews, you can actually turn on and listen.
JFK heading. 9,600 head 15,000 plus heading. $13 BIL heading. 30% heading.
So as a developer, not only can you see the experience that they're going to get in terms of what you saw how the first thing that Joe did is go look at headers. This is a typical approach for screen reader users. This is what they're going to hear, but also allows you to turn speech on so you can actually hear exactly what those combinations actually say. Move into the links. I think this is actually quite interesting, and we can look at this from a so this allows you to see the combination of which links are in which order and sort of start to identify where there's going to be problems for a user. So on this JFK, which is a new JFK site, the first 3 links on the page actually take you away from the site. So these 3 links actually, one goes to Port Authority, one goes to the traveler site for Port Authority, and one goes to a New York Transit. Then there's actually a link that takes you back to this page, and then there's main navigation. So it's quite quick and easy for a developer to see what order the links are in, but then again, if they want, they can actually listen to the experience.
Link http://www.panyj.gov.
So it's quite obvious when you start to realize if something's been properly described as a link, or in this case, actually, there's no alt tag, so it basically is just taking the URL.
Link.
The Twitter link has no description.
Link travelers. Link NY State transforming JFK.
So both of these are actually links off of this site. So if you want to keep them there, you may want to make sure that people know that they're external links.
Link JFK International Airport redevelopment. JFK International Airport redevelopment.
Again, listening to it, you instantly know that you made a mistake on a double description of the actual link itself. But also, I think that as a developer, you might start to realize, well, hang on, I've got
link terminal projects.
I've got a navigational link back to the page I'm on in between other links, which obviously won't make a lot of sense to a user. If Joe came to this for the first time, he might have had to go to 3 other sites before he realized that actually he keeps being sent away from this site.
Link, work, link, contact us.
And you'll see
link,
here,
media.
it actually
link, work with us.
Skips one of the
link.
So public outreach is actually a skip, and the reason for that is if I click on it and go to the actual accessibility tree and look at that inside of and look at it from a code perspective, there is no definition of it being an href. So it's actually not a link. So it actually doesn't give the screen reader user the option to click on that. So these types of tools that allow developers and QA to get that experience quite quickly and experience it in the same way that you heard Joe using the site, gets their minds quickly connecting to what they need to do to make this site more easy and more accessible. It's less about lots and lots of lines of issues found by a testing tool and more of a experience the actual usability of the site and correct those, because developers will know how to fix it. They need to understand the experience. A second thing that we do is we found that there's a real value in continuing to do that screen reader monitoring. So after you've fixed all of the site and you've got that structure working well, creating an ability to map out a user flow, a typical user flow, and then on a regular basis have a system test that against screen readers is one thing that we developed. And just to give you that experience, I've recreated Joe's experience, like going to the home page, going to terminal, trying to find information on terminal. I've recreated that actually as a user flow, and we capture it and we allow a developer to listen to that entire experience throughout the user flow, so they can actually hear where there's problems, hear where they've used wrong descriptions, see exactly the order of focus, so they can again appreciate the overall screen reader experience, and then get in there and correct that experience based on what they're hearing and what they're seeing on the
JFK,
on the test.
Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, web content. Link, http://www.panyj.gov. Link, travelers. Link, NY State, transforming JFK. Link, JFK International Airport redevelopment. JFK International Airport redevelopment. Link, terminal projects. Terminal projects, JFK International Airport redevelopment, web content. Link, http://www.panyj.gov. Link, travelers. Link, NY State, transforming JFK. Link, JFK International Airport redevelopment.
So the ability to go through an actual journey and then listen back to that journey exposes other things. It exposes the fact that the developers haven't put in skip to content links to make that easier for a user. Joe would have to listen to all of these links every time he goes to a new page. This again helps to reinforce what the W3C tells you to do, but from a developer point of view, they get the true experience, so they connect that experience with what they should be fixing. Again, as opposed to just a linear list of things that they want to fix, which has no sort of context in terms of how they're supporting a particular user on the site. So I wanted to show that, technology is moving along where it's now possible to look for these types of features and functions to give to the development and QA team, where they can actually get the experience of a screen reader, but in a more of a QA and dev environment, so it's quicker and faster for them to action on it. I wanted to break away and go back to the deck, Bethany, if possible, and then maybe just get some Q&A going with Joe.
Sure. Go ahead and switch presenters. We did have a polling question, but we're starting to run out of time, so I don't know if we want to still go ahead.
We're okay with that one. I'd like to get a couple of these questions done. I see one that's will the presentation material be made available? Bethany, maybe you can answer that one.
Yes, absolutely. So in the next couple of days, we'll be sending out an email that will have a link to the recording of the full webinar, and it will also have a link where you can download the slides. So those will be made available to everyone that registered, so you can go back through the webinar. We have some other questions that came in. Jason, when an accessibility case settles, what is the settlement beyond any monetary damages? Do these companies remediate their accessibility issues afterward?
Yeah, I'll do that one quickly. So I'd prefer to put out questions for Joe, but yes, typically under the ADA, it's called a no-fault law. So typically they don't include damages, which is why the only fees that someone would have to pay are typically the plaintiff's lawyer's fees if you settle to say that you're at fault. So that's why they want it as short as possible, and that's why they settle so quickly. And typically a settlement will always include that the company is going to remediate their website to WCA AA standards. A settlement letter typically gives them 2 years to do that, but you'll read a couple of blogs that we've written that doesn't protect them for 2 years for other lawsuits, and it's very common that companies are receiving multiple lawsuits even if they settled previous lawsuits, because the settlement is individual, not to the world. It essentially says, I'm going to make sure that the website works for Joe Smith within 2 years, but Jane Smith can come along and sue me tomorrow if the website's not accessible. So if you are in an ADA case, the best thing to do is make your site as accessible and usable as possible. That's going to reduce the most in terms of your exposure to legal cases. I wanted to pick out a couple of ones which are more sort of in the Joe's world. Using JAWS, how does one announce the headers or further activity non-interactive page content? This can be done on Apple's VoiceOver as well. So maybe Joe, you can talk about the range of features that a JAWS user generally has and what they would use to navigate and sort of explore content.
All right. So I have the ability, obviously we have, basic navigation as far as tab and arrow navigation, but within JAWS you have the ability to navigate basically by any element that's on the screen. So I can navigate to an edit field, a button, a combo box, a header. They're called quick navigation keys. So for example, if I hit the letter H within JAWS, that'll take me from heading to heading. If I hit the letter B, it'll take me from button to button. For more experienced JAWS users, that allows someone like myself, or I wouldn't even say very experienced, just a medium level JAWS user, gives them the ability to efficiently be able to navigate and perform whatever task that they need to do on a website efficiently.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay. Jason, did you have a question that you
Well, I wanted to make sure we got quite a few questions here. I don't think we're going to cover them all.
A lot coming in, yes. Thank you, everyone, so much for sending in your questions. If we don't get to your question, I am able to get a report of questions, and we have your contact information, so someone can certainly reach out to you, but we are getting a lot of questions right now. Jason, did you want to choose another one for Joe? Jason, you're on mute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read one.
Sorry, Bethany, I was gonna get the one which talks about like the radio buttons can be navigated only using tab key but not arrow down key. So the question is basically around keyboard accessibility and menu items. Can basically menu items or radio buttons can only be navigated using tab key but not arrow key. Is that a blocker if you can only tab key can be used?
Is it a blocker?
I think it means is it a big issue for somebody if only tab can be used and they can't use the arrow key to move through navigation?
No, it's not a blocker. I mean, because tab and arrow navigate. I mean, ideally you want both. You also, again, with quick navigation keys, you have the ability with the letter A to just go through the radio button selections. Ideally, you would like to have the ability to arrow through or tab through, but it's not a blocker.
Yeah, one thing I would mention, we've seen in the past where someone might combine those in terms of like on the main navigation is tab, but then when you get to sub navigation, it's arrow, but there's no way of telling the user that they've got to switch to arrow to get to sub nav. So if you're gonna, if it's consistent, that helps. So consistency is really what, you know, when we go back to talking about Joe's original experience, consistency and structure, you know, that's how someone who's not visually able to look at clues and what's going on the page builds a map of your website and web application. It's consistency and structure. If you're giving good consistency and structure, people with screen readers will benefit from that more than anything else. I think that's about all we have time for, but we'll definitely get to these questions, Bethany. I don't know if you want to tie up loose ends.
Yes. So thank you everyone so much for sending in your questions. I will pull a report of these and we can have someone reach out to you, or we may use the questions that you send in for future blog content. If you're not a blog subscriber, you know, I would encourage you to sign up there. We share this kind of knowledge quite often. Jason will write blog posts up on the Usable Net blog that address a lot of the issues that and questions that I'm seeing come in. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time today. We really appreciate you spending the hour with us.